Okay, we're going to get started, everybody. So, good morning and thank you so much for coming. I'm Rebecca Hubbard, the Program Director of OurFish, and on behalf of our partners, the Institute for Oceans and Fisheries at the University of British Columbia, OurFish, Siena, and Deutsche Umwelthilfe, we'd really very much like to welcome you here today to our panel, breakfast briefing and panel discussion on fisheries management as climate action. I'll just briefly introduce the panel and then I'll give you a bit of an introduction. We have with us a fantastic lineup of speakers. We have from the rockstar science and economist 12, we have Dr. Rashid Sumaila, who is the Professor and Director of Fisheries Economics Research Unit at the Institute for Oceans and Fisheries at the UBC. Dr. William Cheung, who's an IPCC lead author and I think listed as one of the 20 most influential climate scientists on the planet, and also the Director of the Institute for Oceans and Fisheries at UBC. We're very pleased to welcome Isabella Lövin, the former Deputy Prime Minister and former Environment Minister of Sweden. Also Ms. Charlina Vitcheva, the Director General of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries at the European Commission. And Ms. Ilka Wagner, the Head of Marine Conservation in the Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection in Germany. Of course, we think the first two parts of that ministry are the most important. And we also do have the Fijian ambassador, Sachendra Prasad, who is in the building and will be joining the panel discussion, hopefully, in just a moment. So, just as a little bit of context, of course, we're part of the UN. This is a side event for the UN Ocean Conference. And as you are probably all particularly aware, the latest IPCC report made it explicit the urgent need for action. And along with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's incumbent upon us to act decisively on climate and to accelerate a just transition to a low-impact, low-carbon future. This briefing aims to present and discuss the evidence for how fisheries management can contribute to climate action and to address the biodiversity crisis. We'll explore the politics and the opportunities for transforming fisheries management into a positive driver for mitigating climate change and restoring ocean health instead of worsening that ocean health, which is what we have experienced to a large extent in the past. So we're really looking at this as, how is fisheries management a solution? How do we transform what we're doing in the ocean to become part of a better, brighter future? So we're going to start, I've got a series of questions for the panellists, so we'll start with that and then I'll open to the floor for questions from the floor. So we'll start first of all with the science and a bit of a explanation from our superstars. Rashid, if you could start and then we'll move on to William. How bad are things in the ocean and with the climate? Yeah. And what does the science and the economics tell us are the solutions?
Yeah, how bad is the situation, right? That's the starting point. According to the FAO, by the way, they are releasing their latest report today, I think, yeah. 34% of our fish stocks are overfish, are in trawl. And this is the FAO, right? It's quite conservative organization. It's a membership of the whole world, all the countries. If you look in the scientific data or independent researchers, we are talking about 50% of the fish stocks in the global ocean depleted. So this is a big problem, right? So there is massive overfishing. We use 2.5 times the fishing effort we need to catch fish sustainably. So if you think of climate change, that means we're pumping out, give and take, 2.5 times more carbon than we need to. So this is where fisheries management comes in right in there. And when we talk about fisheries management, we're talking about modern fisheries management, or if you like, actually, ocean management, because fisheries management is just focusing traditionally on the fish they catch, but we're talking about looking at the whole system together here. So that's it. We take too much, 2.5. The other thing we do, thanks to Daniel Pauli's theory of fishing down the food web, usually we catch the big fish, the valuable fish first, then the next big, the next valuable. Think about fishing down the marine food web. And we know that, as William will talk more about, these animals actually do sequester carbon for us. So the big ones, you take them, that is a lot of carbon storage that you are just taking off the table. So that's another thing to watch. The third point is that we are truncating the food web. You know, nature is beautiful. Nature is structured so that it can sustain itself. People tell me, you know what, big fish eat a lot of small fish. Yes, some do, but actually they find a balance. They know how not to eat all the small fish. You kill yourself if you do that. Right? So if you leave the system alone, the system can find its own equilibrium. But if we truncate the ecosystem, we are weakening the whole thing. So, and this is a problem because we all know that if you have pre-existing conditions and you are hit by COVID, you are most likely to survive, right? No, you are, you are likely, you may survive, I should say. But if you don't have this, if you're in good shape and you are hit by COVID, most likely you will survive. We've seen the data, right? And fish is not different from people in many respects, you know? They're living things. So if we weaken them, their system, we weaken them. So when there's a shock like climate change, they cannot really withstand it. So the last point I'll make and pass on to William is that we also use gear that actually disturbs the bottom of the whole ecosystem. The seagrasses, just pounding the bottom, and that destroys a lot of natural capital that does a lot of work for us without us even knowing, right? Think about sea level rise and all the things that go on, and then sequestering carbon also, seagrasses and all that. And we mess up the bottom also with our gears. So that's the state we are. There's overfishing, there's too much carbon coming from the sector, fish are being taken, big ones and so on and so forth. And I think you want me to pass it on to William, who will put.
Thanks, Rashid. I'm providing some more details to the current situation, particularly with regard to climate change. The IPCC in the last few years, with the last these assessment cycles, has already solidly concluded that the ocean is changing under climate change. The ocean is warming, losing oxygen, getting more acidic. At the same time, sea level is rising, Arctic sea ice is decreasing in its extent. All of these are affecting marine ecosystems. One of the things that we are already seeing is that fish stocks are shifting their distributions all over the world. Many fish stocks are shifting towards lofted or higher latitude regions or deeper waters, or following local temperature gradients. What it means to marine ecosystem, to animals, as well as to human beings, fishing, for example, is that some of the fish stocks that our seabirds or marine mammals or fisheries are previously using are decreasing its abundance. One of the examples that I always use is salmon in the Canada, in the Pacific coast of Canada, which is a very important, iconic fisheries as well as culturally important species. It's almost like sardine here. It is decreasing every year, and not only that is affecting fisheries, but then recent study by our colleagues also shows that killer whales, ochre, is also finding hard to get salmon, leading to increase or decreasing in their numbers. So what it means is that it is not only affecting human, but also affecting ecosystems throughout the food chain. And fishing, as what she said, is putting an additional pressure already on these important ecosystems, marine life. So what it means is that if we can reduce or stop overfishing. We can give a chance for the ecosystems to be able to adjust and in addition to when we do effective mitigation. Another things that we know that we are in a situations where we need to have all hands on deck in terms of climate mitigations, reducing carbon emissions, getting to net zero, reducing the climate change. And these include the marine sectors, including the fishing sectors. And so as Rashid said, we have already solid evidence that shows that reducing overfishing, first of all, reduce the use of fuel, and that is a direct contribution to reductions in emissions. And then particularly some of the destructive fishing methods that are affecting ecosystems such as the coastal vegetations, seagrass, kelp forests, that are important carbon storage. So fishing methods that are affecting that needs to be stopped as well. And then at the same time, a few studies already highlight the importance of marine organisms, particularly fish in this case, as its role in carbon sequestrations and storage. So again, reducing the impacts on them through ending overfishing is an important contribution to help marine ecosystems improving their contributions to reducing climate change. So maybe I will stop here and then I'll pass it to the next speaker.
Sound? Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, William and Rashid. That was a really nice overview and nice to start at the big picture and go down into some of those details. So next we'll go to Isabella. You have an incredible and extensive history in the role of decision maker and negotiator as a member of the European Parliament and a minister and as Deputy PM. You were really in that tricky spot of negotiating decisions and actions in response to the science and the advice, and including the delivery of the historic reform of the European Common Fisheries Policy. You've written about this difficult negotiation process in your latest book, Ocean Feeling, and your experience really demonstrates more than most that we know the problems and the solutions, but too often we fail to deliver on the scale or the decisiveness needed to address the crises. So why do you think this is? And where is the blockage between the knowledge and the action?
Well, thank you for that simple question. And great honor to be here and good to see all of you here. And I think the linkage between fish and marine ecosystems and climate is very much an overdue question that we should have discussed 15 years ago or 12 years ago when I was in the European Parliament, but we didn't talk about that at all at that time. But your question, why is it that although we know so much, we're not acting politically on that knowledge? And I very often cite the former president of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. He said, we all know what to do, but we don't know how to be re-elected afterwards. So that is, I think, very important answer to your question, that the political will is lacking. And why is it lacking? So you mentioned I wrote a book about this. The title will be The Oceanic Feeling when it comes out in English. But I think also that we are still very much caught in a paradigm of short-term economic gains. And we have a very hard time getting out of that paradigm. And we're not talking about the intrinsic values, actually, of the ocean or of nature, of our planet. It's like some kind of a charity, something that we can do when we, like a voluntary thing to do, but the real thing that we should do is really to think about the hard economic fact and the growth. And this is, I think, very much a blockage. There are short-term economic interests in exploiting our ocean, in destroying our climate. That's a fact. And we should not kind of shy away from that fact. And we should not only kind of give the blame to the consumers or the citizens for not making any change, but we should actually look to our politicians and say, hey, you need to really take the right decisions and have regulations that are binding in place in order for us to be able to be conscious consumers and to save our world. And basically it comes down to lack of political will. And why is that a lack of political will? It's all like a circle because it's also coming down to all of us. So if you want change, vote for change. I mean, you need really to have a mandate as a politician if you're going to make really fundamental or systemic reforms. We managed to do that once in the European Parliament with the reform of the common fisheries policy. It wasn't enough. You know, it wasn't really setting a standard where we actually apply the precautionary approach. We're still talking about maximum sustainable yield, although we really got into the regulation that we should aim at having stocks above maximum sustainable yield, which would create the space for the resilience that we need for our ecosystems in the light of pressure of climate change, warming, marine heat waves, acidification, all of that, which is exactly as you said, it's like COVID hitting an already weak patient when we have overfishing and eutrophication and pollution and all of that. Okay, so that's the short story.
Nothing too difficult to overcome there, Isabella. Thanks for that. Okay, so Ms. Vitcheva, we'll move on to you next at the European Commission level. So just last week, and following on with this theme, just last week the Commissioner Sinkevicius for the Oceans, Environment and Fisheries tweeted, "No excuses, no delays anymore. It's time to stop the biodiversity and climate crisis." So pretty tough talk. Yet at the same time, the Commission was celebrating a WTO deal, which by many accounts and from many experts will essentially continue and essentially will not end harmful subsidies which drive overcapacity and overfishing, such as fuel subsidies. So how do we square the Commissioner's call for bold action with the celebration of mediocre success?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, a pleasure for me to be today with you and such a distinguished panel. If you allow me just to say something as a comment, because we are in the same boat and we as European Commission actually are implementing the common fisheries policy reform that was decided about 10 years ago, 9. And I have to reassure you that I agree with you that we have to aim at more than MSY. I have to reassure you that as Commission, we are always proposing a more precautionary approach. So we go 4 levels that are above MSY in our proposals. Plus, in the last 2 years, we are absolutely adamant about the precautionary approach, because you are absolutely right that until 2020, when we had the obligation to, as a must, to implement the MSY rule, the precautionary approach, meaning where we don't have enough science and robust scientific evidence, because we are working on the basis of the best available science, then we were setting it aside. So all the discussion, all the negotiations were on MSY. But now we are really serious about precautionary approach. And I have figures, but no need to mention them here. On WTO, I have to say that we were struggling by the end to have the full text of the chair. So that was the Chilean ambassador that was driving behind the whole discussion. Ambassador Wills, extremely good work, by the way, and the Director General Ngozi, very committed. The European Union was a shaper of the decisions. We were also an intermediary between the parties that were trying to reach a middle ground. In the end, we have indeed this not full scope of deal. It's a whole of Article 5, if we have to be precise, which is exactly about subsidies that are contributing to overcapacity and overfishing, including fuel subsidies. But let's be also a bit more on the praising side, because this is the first ever agreement on fisheries, the first ever agreement which is centered around sustainability, and probably the most important deal, I'm quoting a number of opinions, since the establishment of WTO in 1996. So we have to be proud that 164 countries are behind this deal. I'm not going to mention more. What are we going to do in the future? So the discussions continue, and the compromise was that, okay, we agree on this first step, but we have to continue. And we will continue as of next month, so to say. And in the next ministerial meeting, the 13th one next year, we really are aiming at achieving a full deal. On the fuel subsidies, first of all, the European Commission has made a proposal. We have a directive that is related to taxation for fuel, which was exempting a number of sectors. And now the proposal is that this exemption should end. Of course, we cannot scrap a sector. We need to have an accompanied transition, so that will take time. How we are accompanying the transition, we are extremely adamant as Commission, and it is in the making, something that we want to propose to our fishermen for decarbonizing vessels. Let's also remember that we are talking here about overfishing, but fishing as such is actually gaining for the mankind probably one of the lowest carbon footprint food. So we have to continue fishing, but in a way that it is not going to hamper climate and ecosystems. So for this, we would like even to further decrease the carbon emissions, and we will come by the end of this year with a very concrete plan that will help the fishermen, because we have to face the reality. We have so many small-scale fishermen out there that are keeping fisheries community, our heritage, our culture. So we need to preserve that. So we have to be accompanying them with very concrete proposals, with the current technological advance, what they can do on their boards, either to have alternative fuels on board or renewable energies. So this is to come by the end of this year.
Thank you, Ms. Vitcheva. It's very difficult being the moderator and not responding to every speaker. So I hope you all are collecting excellent comments and questions for the panel, because we'll be moving to you shortly. So, Ms. Wagner, Germany. I think it's an exciting time, and it's quite interesting, you know, we're talking about lack of political will, but a number of governments have been voted in around the world, including in Germany and my home country of Australia recently, with incredibly strong support for action, bold, strong, urgent action to deal with the climate and biodiversity crisis. So I think that political support, that voting for action has really gained a lot of ground, particularly in the last few years, even despite the COVID crisis, even despite the war in Ukraine and the many other crises that we're increasingly facing around the world. But the war in Ukraine has increased pressure on all of the EU in a particular way, which is keenly felt in Germany, with an accelerating energy crisis. And this is obviously due to dependence on fossil fuels, and particularly from a few countries. So this is a situation that is clearly untenable, and obviously the science demonstrates that we need to incredibly rapidly act to shift this dependence. But with the new government and with this incredibly strong show of political or public support for political action, and the exciting new appointment of a new ocean coordinator in Germany of Sebastian Unger from the Potsdam Institute, is Germany in the perfect position to champion the application of this science and to ensure that fisheries management does deliver all that it can for climate action?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation, of course. Good to see so many people here being interested in this, especially in the nexus of fisheries and climate change. And indeed, I think the question of where can we find political leadership, as we've heard that political will is lacking to bridge the gap between knowledge and action. I think this is the right question. At the same time, I wouldn't say that Germany or any other country is in a perfect position to change really groundbreaking things alone in this area. But I think we are in a good position as we see a strengthening, as you described, of marine issues in the Environment Ministry. We also have a green minister for agriculture and fisheries. And this is a chance for kind of new alliances. Inter alia, the Fisheries Ministry will establish a roundtable for looking at the small-scale fisheries, especially in the Baltic Sea, the German small-scale fisheries. And this is a very ample opportunity to talk about the structural change that has to happen there. Because the discussion about fisheries, especially small-scale fisheries, reminds me a little bit of my home area, the Ruhr area, where we also had structural change because of coal energy, and people were not really ready to make this change. And I think political will is so important to make the next step forward. And to make the link to the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine, I think what we see at the moment now, at least I can say that for the discussions in Germany, is that we might have a pushback, honestly. Yeah, because there are many people advocating for more gas, which is also not environmentally or really climate friendly, a really climate friendly opportunity. And at the same time, there's rising pressure to put wind offshore farms into the North Sea, into the Baltic Sea. We have very, very ambitious targets, which we, of course, because of climate change and climate protection, support. But at the same time, these are, of course, challenges for biodiversity, for marine biodiversity. And this is our aim from the environmental side, definitely, but I also think from the fisheries side, to have a nature-friendly change and boost of renewable energies here. But one thing that is really, really important to me is this nexus between fisheries management and climate. We have heard that we know about the interlinkages between carbon sequestration and fish stocks and marine ecosystems. But I think we still have to need to learn a lot more about that. My impression is we are just beginning to understand these interlinkages. But what seems to be important to me is when we look at the common fisheries policy in the EU, because I'm at the kind of receiving end of these very, very complicated processes to have real fisheries management for marine nature conservation in our areas in the North Sea and Baltic Sea. And climate change does not play a role at all at the moment. Not really on the ground when we look at things like fisheries management, like having less dredging, less mobile contacting gears, this is traditional, kind of traditional fisheries policy, and it's also traditional conservation policy from our side, from the environmental side. But really to take into account what does climate change mean? What does it mean for the quota when we see that fish stocks are moving because of the warming water? What does it mean? How can we take that on board? This is something that's definitely, from our perspective, missing, and I think we really have to tackle that. And one last example to try to be concrete: marine spatial planning. We had a new marine spatial planning plan last year adopted. Climate change played no role at all there. Absolutely no role. And I think we are just at the beginning of this road. And for many communities, it's really new. It's new to make this linkage. And this has also something to do, my last point, with political will, because we have to go beyond all of those who are already convinced that we have to do more. So how do we approach others beyond our own communities? That's a very decisive point from my point of view. And we are ready to go down that road. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. I feel like once we start taxing fuel, we can redirect that revenue into supporting some of these communities and these fishing fleets to become more low carbon and more low impact. And certainly the call for climate and ecosystem impact assessments of fishing is one of the things that our fish has been particularly driving for in the EU, so that we can then start to allocate access to the resource, to fishing, based on environmental and social benefits, based on the delivery that they can support. So I just also wanted to mention that we did have the ambassador to the UN from Fiji, Mr. Sachendra Prasad, in the panel. And the reason that we had the ambassador in the panel was because Fiji has been one of the leading countries. It's a small island developing state, but it's also a large ocean state. And it's really been driving the call for ocean climate action, both at an international level, but also delivering it at home in Fiji. Already moving to decarbonise the fleet, already looking at fisheries management solutions. And unfortunately, the ambassador's been called away. But I guess the point of is to demonstrate that there is already political will and momentum, and there's no better time than now, really, for action, is there? Well, it was 20 years ago, but since we're here now, let's work with that. So we're going to move over to questions from the audience. So if you put your hand up, we have a microphone and we can bring one around, and we'd love to hear. Claire, what a surprise. I just was so surprised you have a question, and I've been waiting for it ever since I saw you. Claire Nuvion, please go ahead.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Sorry, my throat didn't like the air conditioning on the plane. I'm really happy to see the European Commission in this panel. I think it's great that you came down and you participated in this panel, because we need perspectives, and we know the European Commission can play such an important visionary role in our neck of the woods. So I have two very precise questions for you. We've been waiting for the Ocean Action Plan, which was supposed to be the Spring Action Plan. So I'd like to know when you will release it. And I would like to know, of course, because there are big expectations, as you know, that there is a clear ban on all bottom contact gear within MPAs in the plan. So I would like to know if you can confirm that the European Commission will provide that guidance so that we become exemplary worldwide, because we need at least to meet the IUCN criteria of what an MPA is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for setting the Commission in such a positive role. I have to confirm that, though, we are very much, most often, in the position of an attack and defensive. Also because very often everything is dumped on the Commission when you talk local politics, which is not fair. So thank you for that. Now, first of all, probably to say something about bottom trawling. It is not that it is exactly the same like many, many years ago. Only yesterday, we managed to pass through the management committee a very important implementing decision which supplements the deep sea access regulation. And actually it bans now bottom trawling in 57 areas, which ICES provides us an advice that there are VMEs, vulnerable marine ecosystems, or very high likelihood that they exist there. So this is a very big achievement, I have to say, for the deep sea fisheries. On the action plan, we are preparing it not without pain, because we have to find the right balance, how to give a perspective for the fishermen, and how to, at the same time, have a bold decision, as the Commissioner is saying, about the most harmful gears. And of course, society thinks, and rightly so, on many cases, that bottom trawling is one of the most harmful to seabed. This action plan, I cannot prejudge it. We are going into the right direction. This is what I can say. Is dealing specifically with bottom trawling as one of the elements. We were trying to deliver it before this conference, then before the summer break. Now, most probably, it will be the end of August, the first commission session, the college session after the summer break. But I think it shapes well. It deals also with how to avoid sensitive species bycatch, which is very, very important. It will, of course, motivate the fishermen to go for much more selective gear. We will have a number of fishes with not fish like catching the fish, but paper fish about how to deal with specific sensitive fishes, and you will see there is a lot there. Bottom trawling is in there as well. I just want to say something which is very important to remember. Not all the knowledge is there about the harmful effect of the gears, and it's a very complex question, because the gears they have to be taken in their overall picture. So one gear will be more harmful for the seabed, but less harmful for the seabirds, for the mammals, and so on. Other gears, if you want to avoid touching the integrity of seabed, then it's the other way around. So we have to be very cautious, first not to have displacement of effort, and secondly not to give more damage somewhere else. So this knowledge is very important. Plus, when we deal with an economic sector, we have to be very keen to be able to provide solid evidence that indeed in this particular area we ban bottom trawling because it's really harmful. So this is what I can say, but you can expect good result. Hope so. The college, I trust the wisdom of the college, of the commissioners.
Thank you, Ms. Vitcheva. Rashid, I'd just like to hand to you, and I just wonder whether or not you have any comments or reflections on the Commission's upcoming action plan, particularly with respect to Claire's question, in terms of the known impact of bottom trawling, how much protection we really need in the ocean. I think the EU is definitely less than 10% fully protected, and it could be even like 2 or 3. I don't work on protected areas. Claire's giving me a 2%. So if we have around 40% of fish stocks in the Northeast Atlantic being overfished at the moment, we have about 2% in protected areas. What does the science say and the economics say in terms of bottom trawling and what needs to be in that action plan?
Yeah, there was a report which was published this week or last week by a Portuguese group here. I reviewed the report, and it's on bottom trawling. And what they found is that without subsidies, which we talked about, most of them, almost all of them, will not be viable. The bottom trawlers operating Portuguese ones. So that's one piece of information to remember, right? Now, another thing is you talk a lot about how complicated it is, which is true, how there is uncertainty. We don't understand the whole thing. What you do, if you go to investment people, what they tell you is that if you don't have full information and you talk about precautionary approach, you just have to be very careful and you have to diversify. So the fact that only 2% of the surface area of the EEZ is protected is very scary. Right? It's like putting all your retirement money on Elon Musk stock, huh? You know, and then it's flying and you're happy. By the time you wake up in the morning, it's gone down by 50%. You really have to broaden that diversity and explain to the fishers. I know you try. I mean, I'm an economist. I understand a lot of what you're saying. We don't want the economic sector to die because people depend on it, and you have to balance all this. But the thing is to take precautionary measures. 30 by 30 is, I don't know, Europe, have you signed on this, the EU? The 30 by 30 thing, that's one way you can buy insurance and make sure that you will have some retirement money when you know, and you turn your fisheries into something that can give you benefit through time, which is what we're all struggling, right? Short-termism, as you mentioned, is really a big problem. It's discounted. You know, the indigenous people in Canada, they talk about managing their fisheries or their ecosystem for the 7th generation, all right? That is proper thinking here. So it's not just about profit every quarter. You have to think long-term. And if you do that, fish can actually be infinity fish. It can give you benefits through time. And if you sum any benefit, even if it is small, through time to infinity, your benefit is infinity. I know your fishers will say, oh, we want our thing now, but that is why we have the government. We have the commission to tell them, okay, we know you have these issues, but you have to think the fish is not only for you, it's also for your children and grandchildren and their children and grandchildren. I know it's easier said than done, but that's why we hire our politicians, right? So great.
Thank you, Rashid. Any other questions from the audience? Sorry, over here.
Hi, yes. I'm Sheila Heymans from the European Marine Board. And I have a comment and a question. A comment on the issue of the policymakers not taking account of climate change. That's actually not true, because we've just done a study where we actually asked the policymakers what are the most important things they want in a project that we're doing on ecosystem-based management, where they really need information. Climate change was the one that came out highest. So that study is just out today, so you can check that out. Ecoscope is the project. So the policymakers are aware. The politicians might not be there yet, but the policymakers are aware. So that's by the by. But my question is to all of you. We've all talked about making sure that we fish sustainably within the Canadian waters, within the European waters. But what about where does those fishermen go? And what happens in the high seas? What happens, how many of these boats are now going to go down to West Africa and actually overfish there because you're making it harder for them to fish here? So again, if you don't subsidize them, this won't happen. So subsidies for sure is the thing that you have to cut out now, because it will also help people in the developing world. So my question is, how do we deal with that?
Excellent. You can keep hold of that. William, do you want to take that? Maybe we can start at that end. Or Isabella, because I understand that you have quite a close and long understanding as well of far fishing.
I was the rapporteur of the external dimension of the reform of the common fisheries policy, and what you're saying is, of course, true, that we must make sure, fish is one of the most internationally traded commodities of all commodities. And the European Union, now we're talking very much about the European Union, but it's the biggest fish consumer market. And we also introduced the IUU regulation and making sure that what we're importing is actually traceable and sustainably caught, and from countries that have a fisheries regulation and also capacity of control and monitoring and yeah, so really seeing that the regulations are followed. So that is very, very important. But then, of course, there's huge gaps in the international regulations when it comes to fisheries. And there's some countries that are not respecting what we would expect them to respect. We have countries, big countries, that are very opaque. We don't have transparency. We don't know how much is being caught really and where it comes from. And we also have, unfortunately, we have flags of convenience. We have states that offer flags of convenience, and I think this is one of the biggest faults of the international community, that we allow this to go on, because it really creates a very Wild West situation for those that really just can buy a flag, and then you have the owner of the vessel comes from one country, the crew from a third country, etc., and the beneficial owner is from a fourth country. So I think this is one area where we also need to focus attention. But yeah, but coming back to fish and carbon, I don't think that there's an awareness when it comes to fisheries management that taking fish out of the ocean is actually creating emissions in the atmosphere, because otherwise this fish would sink to the seafloor. It would eat stuff, and you're better on this, but it actually is a carbon sink when you keep the marine organisms in the water and not take them out. And this consciousness is not there.
Yeah.
Rashid and then Charlina. Yeah.
Yeah. So after a quarter of a century over that, that's a long time in this business. One of the things my mind is on these days is exactly the kind of things you talked about, Prime Minister. I think our management systems are very fragmented. They don't talk to each other. So you give subsidy, China or EU, the subsidy goes to West Africa or Latin America and destroys the system. I think we need to really take this thing. Scientists talk about that the ocean is actually one ocean. I tell Canadians, even Canadian waters are no islands. They connect to the rest of the world, right? So we need to lift off and think almost like cartographers, map makers, I'm fascinated by maps, really. They're amazing. So you take a global map, you will not see this building on that map, but that building is there, right? You zoom to this area, you have a smaller scale map, and you will find this place. And this place will be where the global map says it will be, right? You are not going to find us in South Africa or in Mexico. We will be here. Why? Because the maps talk to each other. So I think we have to do fisheries management thinking in that way. We have local scale effort, national scale effort, and global scale effort. And these things have to talk to each other. What do I mean by that? Then you don't give subsidy that goes there and cause damage. It's our global ocean. Or you don't catch fish illegally here and bring it to the EU because we have a system that blocks that. And then you will also know that maybe you should close the damn high seas completely from fishing. It's the most unmanaged part of the ocean. We take very little out of it anyway, pump out so much CO2 to catch the 4 to 8% we catch. Close it off. The fish get a break. That helps biodiversity. It's mainly tuna. They will come in. Small countries, Bangladesh will get to catch, Guinea-Bissau, not only China, Taiwan, Spain, you get it. So you help the distribution. It's just a beautiful way of thinking. Let's get to that place where we're not talking about little fisheries management, but management of our global ocean as a whole.
Okay, Charlina, would you like to make a comment?
Yes,
And then we'll have
I have
one
to react
final
on a couple
question.
of things. Yeah. First of all, we were the first ones to sign up to 3030 target with the biodiversity strategy, so the European Union is there. Secondly, probably the 2% is meant for strict management. Honestly, we are above the average for the world, about this 30%, and we are more than 12% at the moment, and we are heading quite high at the moment because member states are preparing MPAs, but we are above the average. In the Mediterranean, we have a huge progress, and yesterday when I was talking to the chief executive for fisheries in FAO, he was saying that GFCM, the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean, is the best example of how fast and how committed we are. And there I have to say that the European Union is the shaper, because last year there were 34 recommendations for conservation, 32 were initiated by the European Union. The second thing that I wanted to say, the global perspective. West Africa, we have sustainable fisheries partnership agreements there. The European Union does not allocate harmful subsidies. Harmful subsidies the way they are defined. So all our subsidies have a sustainability element, and in West Africa we always catch the surplus. So honestly, I want to put the thing straight and the way it is, because I don't want that you leave with the understanding that the European Union is subsidizing harmfully our fish fleet. Plus WTO, all these disciplines that we are talking about, the global discipline, WTO is the best example. Now, when it is going to be ratified, this agreement, we will ban the subsidies for the high seas. This is extremely important. So high sea subsidies are not allowed anymore. Plus, any IUU related subsidies are banned. So that is another thing. And I'm happy that we really mentioned the IUU regulation, the illegal, unreported, unregulated fisheries regulation, where we are with zero tolerance, really zero tolerance, with a lot of transparency, which was a bit a difficulty for WTO members, but we are extremely transparent of what we are doing.
Thank you, Ms. Vitcheva. Go ahead.
Two very short remarks from my side. One is on MPAs. I think the one thing, I can only stand by your side, of course, as the Commission. It's good to underline where we stand when it comes to the designation and the number, the percentage of MPAs. But of course, it's not enough. Yeah, it's not enough to have just the number. We have over 45% protected areas in German waters and in the EEZ. But we have no real strict measures by now. So that's the point. And what I would like to see, and what we would like to see from the environmental side and from the government, is to have an integration of designation of MPAs and climate change. It's not enough to know climate change is a serious problem. Yeah, that's clear. And I don't need an additional study, to be honest, to know that. But you have to integrate that into the processes, and you have to overcome the gaps which are there. So that would be something to make MPAs climate-proof. And the other thing is I would like to point your attention to, but I'm sure you are all aware that there are one of the most important UN negotiations going on, and it's the BBNJ negotiations. We have hopefully the last round in August in New York. And one of the many very basic questions which are still open there is, what is the relationship between the new agreement, a multilateral agreement, and regional and sectoral organizations like regional fisheries management organizations? Yeah, and this new agreement has to have an added value if we just rubber stamp UN for everything that regional and fisheries organizations do, because not everything is good for the biodiversity, for the marine biodiversity at the high seas. That's kind of concern that this is lacking public attention, these negotiations. I would just like to underline this very, very important process. So there's really still a lot to do.
Thank you, Ilka. Oh yeah, this is excellent, William. I'll actually take your last comment, and then I think we'll close because we have gone a little bit over time already.
So I think just adding to the speakers, one of the things about the international aspect is one thing that, I mean, throughout the last decade of my work, one of the most worrying things that is always show up in my study, my colleagues' studies, is that always the tropical countries are the most impacted by climate change in terms of the fisheries. For example, in every of our mapping exercise of the risk of climate change on fisheries, West Africa is the highest impacted and risk area. So what it means is that the things that we need to make sure not happening of shifting the demand of fish from Europe or from other northern countries to tropical areas such as West Africa is even more important under climate change, because we need the fish for the biodiversity there, for the people there. And we need also to do what we can as much as possible to help support the development of adaptation measures, in addition to helping to contribute to mitigations, carbon mitigation, to reduce the impact, so that we can give a better chance to reduce all the impacts that they are receiving in those regions. So I just want to highlight that point as well.
Excellent, thank you, William. I think this is quite a good space to end. We're a little bit over time, but I think it's been fantastic. I think we have reasserted a few things: the importance of ambition and having strong ambition from players like the EU and other nations. Also, that we still have a gap between our ambition and our delivery, that the situation is becoming more and more critical, and people on the ground, both in fishing communities and the marine life, are struggling and suffering as a result. But that we also have some really clear opportunity to turn fisheries management, really translate and transform that into management to address the climate and biodiversity crisis, not just single fish stock management, because those days are gone and we're ready to move on. So thank you so much to our panel. You're brilliant. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Just a couple of final comments. If you'd like to hang around and talk to people, please go ahead. I'm sorry we have to move on. We have a few people here, colleagues, who have a survey on, very short, 2-minute survey, on how we communicate about ocean and climate action. So if they come up to you with an iPad, please give them 2 minutes of your opinion. That would be really great. Nat's waving in the background there. And if you missed out on a coffee, oh yes, and they'll be downstairs as well. If you missed out on a coffee because of the queue when we started, I think you could probably go down there now and say, I was at that event upstairs and I would like my coffee now, please.
Just to say that I will be available, because I saw some, exchanges. So I will be available down for coffee talk for next 15 minutes.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.